let's start with a very specific question. When we're talking about the Russia-Ukraine situation, how screwed are we?
Yeah, it's a very concerning situation. Look, I find that the Biden administration clearing the Ukrainians' use of long range strike weapons into Russia in between, as it's going to transition power to a Trump administration that has talked about negotiations to just be, I don't even know how to describe that. Vindictive. I don't know what the right word is, Mike, but it's unseemly at the least. It seems to be an attempt to sabotage Trump administration policies. If after almost 3 years of war, the Biden administration wasn't going to approve the the long range strike capacity for U.S. weapons, why would it do so now? And to me, it's only
Well,
the
you know
only
what?
reason to do so is to complicate things for an incoming Trump administration. But what bothers me even more
I mean,
about this is,
they've hooked it on. But I'm sorry for interrupting, Bill. But the
yeah,
White House obviously pegged this decision, both on the long range munitions, the ATACMs, and the use of anti personnel mines. They've pegged both of those decisions to the North Korean presence, right? Suddenly, that was the game changer from their perspective. That's what they're saying. So, is there any credibility in that from your perspective?
it's an awful excuse. The North Koreans are providing what 10,000 troops to the combat. Look, I'm no fan of Putin or his invasion of Ukraine. It's illegal, it's immoral, all of those things. But, look, Westerners have volunteered to fight in the ranks of the Ukrainian military. It's that kind of war. I don't understand how Ukraine or how North Koreans in a limited capacity all of a sudden clears the decks for the U.S. to approve long range strike capability for U.S. missiles for something that bothers and caused the Russian to use an intermediate range ballistic missile that is equipped to use nuclear warheads to fire it on Ukraine. And this is the point I was going to make is that we're just seeing an escalation here. And I warned about this from the day one of this war. This is an administration that couldn't manage a war with the Taliban, with a third-rate militia that we've elevated into a regional power in Central Asia, and we think that it can manage a war with nuclear implications in against a nuclear power, and that's very disturbing. Where is Joe Biden? What is he? Look, I try to leave the
I believe
politics out here,
I
but
can
it's
answer that question. Yeah, I can answer that question. I believe he's still in the Amazon,
yeah,
because the
it's the
Amazon is a
last I
big
saw
place,
he
right?
was walking into the
Yeah,
forest. And
yeah, yeah, and
all
and that's a
joking
big
aside,
forest, if I can say that much. Yeah,
all
go ahead.
joking aside, I
No,
mean, he was shoved aside to run for president because of this. This administration should, tread water in Ukraine and hand over the policy to an incoming Trump administration. 2 months before leaving office, it's going to risk nuclear escalation. I find this to be both disturbing and irresponsible at the same time.
yeah. I mean, I think there's so many layers here. When we're talking about the decision from the Biden White House to do this, right? And as you pointed out, look, for the entire duration of this war, right? The one constant with the White House has been the fear of escalation, right? Which is why, obviously, for all this time, they did not approve the use of these long range munitions into Russian territory. Right? And so, I mean, I think that pinning that decision, I agree with you on the North Korean issue, right? It seems like a disconnect. Okay, sure, we're upset that Kim Jong Un is sending troops, but he's been sending munitions and hardware and other support for almost the duration of the war. Sending troops, yes, it's visually it's bizarre, right? But it's part and parcel of what you could probably have predicted from that relationship, particularly given the personnel issues that Putin has and the desire not to have another conscription. But I kind of have to side with you on this one that it seems, I think you used the word vindictive. and that almost fits, right? Because there's no other real logical reason for it, unless, and let me get your opinion on this, unless there's some intelligence that we're not seeing about a new counteroffensive in Kursk. Obviously, the Russians have been massing troops up there. Reportedly, they've got some 50,000, and that may be where the bulk of the North Korean troops are. And my guess is they're at the front of the line, about to be shoved into the meat grinder. But unless they felt as if Putin is close to moving on Kursk, taking back that territory, and removing one of the few points of leverage that Zelensky has in terms of sitting down at the negotiating table.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly is possible. I think that the Kursk, Ukrainian presence in Kursk is it's just a matter of time before the Ukrainians lose their foothold in Russia. The Russians are determined to take it back. I have a feeling that this isn't one that Putin will negotiate for. I think it's a matter of honor for Putin and for the Russians to retake that territory. So, what are the arguments I'm hearing about for permitting the long-range strike capabilities is to force the Russians to the table, right? To get them to negotiate a settlement. But the Ukrainians insist that the only settlement they'll accept is full Russian withdrawal. That's not going to happen.
No, absolutely not.
And then the argument is well, Putin's not going to negotiate. He wants to take the whole of Ukraine or split Ukraine, or he's not going to. So if you're not going to be able to get Putin to the table, how does launching missiles, which, by the way, may have the opposite effect of what you think, it may harden Putin and it may harden the Russian people to fight harder to dismantle a Ukrainian government. The fact is the Ukrainians are losing. And I don't like this. I hate making these arguments, Mike, because I'll get accused of being pro-Putin for this. But we have to look at the reality on the ground. Ukraine is a country with a quarter of the population, probably more like a fifth at this point, given the exodus of people from Ukraine. The fifth of the population of Russia does not have its own industrial capability. Russia is a nuclear armed country. It has a large economy with petroleum and other exports. It has a large manufacturing base. It makes its own weapons. These are all stacked against Ukraine. We could provide a limited number of weapon systems, even the long-range strike systems that we send to the Ukrainians. There's only so many of them that we can send. So they're going to have limited capacity. This war was always stacked against Ukraine. Ukraine would have been wise to take whatever kind of deal it could and then revamped and rearmed for whatever future conflict may come. Thinking that we're going to drive the Russians to the table by allowing long-range strike capabilities for a limited number of missiles and rockets is just, it's fantasy to me.